Hi, my name is Annie Aldrich. I am in the MSW program here at Eastern Washington University, and I am doing my recorded presentation for the Student Choice Project number 3, Advocacy and Policy. The topic I chose to do my paper on is a policy analysis paper, and I decided to focus on Chapter 43.185C RCW. And that chapter is on funding for housing and homelessness. And then in this paper, I looked at the policy, but then I also looked at potential changes to the policy that could be made in order to make a real difference in homelessness. Not that the policy isn't helpful in itself or that the people working with the policy aren't making changes, but there's a huge influx in homelessness. Washington State has the fifth highest homeless rate in the country, and I'm from the West Side. I'm from the Seattle area, and the West Side in King County in particular has been seeing, an influx in homelessness. But when I moved to Spokane, the homeless crisis has really come into the limelight. It seems like with Camp Hope and more awareness of homelessness, and then the different things that come along with homelessness, whether that be mental health, substance abuses, maybe crime rates. That being said, within the research of this policy, a lot of mental health can happen after somebody becomes homeless. When I say mental health, I mean the negative attributes of mental health brought on by the stress of becoming homeless and being exposed to crimes, getting all your identification stolen, having all your belongings stolen or damaged. A big part of this research talked about finding a solution for each village, essentially. There's no silver bullet for ending this. But where I'm concerned, as far as environmental justice is concerned, in my eyes, is that, if we cannot come together as a state or counties and figure out what best works for ending homelessness, what will we do when climate change refugees start moving north? That's starting to happen, whether it's climate change related, failure of government related, wars. All these things will impact people directly, people who are in these locations, and then obviously the people who are migrating. So this has been a study of mine ever since I started my undergrad. But becoming a social worker, it has been something I've been very interested in and driven to try and be a part of the solution. So some of the interesting facts about this chapter was that it is efficient, but a lot of the studying, so the chapter changes every 5 years. It is updated. And updates are usually just points away from being passed throughout the history of the bill. My biggest thought and takeaway from not being a political person myself or understanding potentially how all policy works is, how do we sell this to the constituents and people in policy who have the power to change these bills and change these laws. And And then how do we get people to agree with it? I think it's really important to point out that a study back in 2014, October 2014, showed that somebody living with chronic homelessness or living in chronic homelessness cost taxpayers $30,000 to $50,000 per year, and that's due to the heating and cooling centers that most counties put up during the summer and winter months, but also emergency room visits. This year alone in Spokane, there were numerous frostbite emergencies. A lot of people lost fingers and toes, and then deaths in general. That can add up for taxpayers, but also we're talking about human beings. And so how do we avoid that kind of damage to humans? But also, how do we create a smaller bill for the taxpayers? Because there's just going to be people who don't care about these people. They're neighbors of ours, and we live in a society that has rules. And so as the people who have privilege and or maybe the ability to make the difference, I think it's our responsibility, especially as social workers, to be at the forefront of making this change. Another interesting, if we're selling it from a financial perspective to people who might not be interested in helping the homeless, a chronically homeless person costs the taxpayers an average of $35,578 per year. Costs on average are reduced by 49.5% when they are placed in supportive housing. And the definition of supportive housing usually coincides with long-term housing or permanent housing. Supportive housing costs an average of $12,800, making the net savings roughly $4,800 per year for each taxpayer. So it literally costs less to give permanent housing to folks who are chronically homeless. That's if anything, let's save money and potentially use that saved money and put it towards, I don't know, the schools or healthcare system or whatever else is really important to each county and the state as a whole. There's a lot of opportunity there for growth and even potentially saving more than that in the long run, if there's at least some sort of trial run to see what works and what doesn't. Now, Seattle and Portland have had a few different styles of trying to come up with the solution for homelessness. There have been the tiny home villages. One in particular in Seattle is a 2-year housing program, and it's very strict, has a pretty serious vetting system for who they allow into the tiny home village. And a social worker actually works there in helping these folks get their identification cards, which can that can take up to 6 months to a year alone. So 2 years is not really a long time for somebody to get on their feet when it comes to getting paperwork that they need in order to get a job, to be approved for an apartment, or any of that, get a loan, let alone that. I mean, it's very time consuming for folks who are potentially disabled or having a difficult time just getting around. So that system worked out really well for Seattle. and there are some other case studies in Portland that are similar. However, not everybody wants to have tiny home villages. And I think what's important is that all stakeholders are able to come to the table and to discuss what they hope to see. People want solutions, but they don't necessarily want them in their backyard. And so I think it's an important role for a social worker to hear all the voices that are sitting at that table, and what the needs or expectations might be. That being said, homeless people are not going away, and we can't bus them over to another big city or another town. It's an epidemic. So I think instead of trying to brush it under the table or push it, down south or to another city, there are a lot of opportunities to get involved and be a part of the change. And my hope is that Washington State can be a leader in that change, considering we have the fifth highest homeless rate out of 50 states. I think we could be an example of how to make that change happen. But a lot of that will depend on the city, on the county, and on the community at large. So that's my presentation for policy and how social workers fit into that, and how it all is connected to environmental justice. It's, to me, it's the number one in my mind for environmental justice, because there's no reason why people should be dying in the summer and the winter time due to elements. And with climate change having its real effects on, well, it's had its real effects everywhere around the world, but it's now in our backyard, right? And so I think that this is an important part of environmental justice as a social worker and as a citizen of Spokane and Washington State. So I hope you guys enjoyed my little presentation on homelessness and the impact of change for the good of environmental justice. And I hope that other social workers are interested and moved by this topic as well. If you are, please reach out to me through Canvas, and I would love to hang out and talk about homelessness and the potential policy changes that there could be, and what we could do as social workers together. So anyway, thank you for your time, and be safe out there.